Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be focusing on the second chapter of Lamentations. One of the things I like about Lamentations, and indeed any of the books in the Bible that focus on this, is that it gives us the ability to complain. There are plenty of books in the Bible where people say, well, some iteration of this sucks. Lamentation says, this sucks. This is worse than we deserve. Hey, how come these other people who did things that seem just as bad, how come this didn't happen to them? And when I'm having a crappy day, I can read Lamentations and I can find a lot of things for me in the midst of that rotten day. I can find anger. Sometimes it's helpful to be angry. Sometimes I want to say, well, how come this person said this? How come they acted in this way? Can't they clearly see that that's the wrong decision? And in our lives, there are times that people make decisions that are the wrong decision. Sometimes anger can drive us to action. Anger can drive us to improving. Sometimes I am caught up in the sorrow. And sometimes it's nice to know that I'm not alone in my sorrow, that other people are in their own place and in their own times in the midst of that. And then sometimes when I read this or other parts of the Bible, I'll look at my own life and I'll say, well, things really aren't so bad. When I look at the second chapter of Lamentations, the first part of it describes God, describes the Lord as an enemy. How the Lord in his anger has humiliated daughter Zion. He has thrown down from heaven and to earth the splendor of Israel. He has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. The Lord has destroyed without mercy all the dwellings of Jacob. In his wrath he has broken down the strongholds of daughter Judah. He has brought down to the ground in dishonor the kingdom and its rulers. He has cut down in fierce anger all the might of Israel. He has withdrawn his right hand from them in the face of the enemy. He is burned like a flaming fire in Jacob, consuming all around. He has bent his bow like an enemy. With his right hand set like a foe, he has killed all in whom we took pride in the tent of daughter Zion. He has poured out his fury like fire. The Lord has become like an enemy. He has destroyed Israel. He has destroyed all its palaces and laid in ruins its strongholds and multiplied in daughter Judah mourning and lamentation. He has broken down his booth like a garden. He has destroyed his tabernacle. The Lord has abolished in Zion festival and Sabbath, and his fierce indignation has spurred king and priest. So a few reflections on the worldview. That's the second chapter of Lamentations. And that is, to me, basically a people saying, God, you attacked us. There are numerous passages in the Hebrew Bible that speak of Jerusalem as God's footstool, as kind of the resting feet of his feet on earth. They're saying, how could you do that to us? They look and interpret the author of Lamentations, these nations that have come from afar, as acting on behalf of God. Sometimes we might look at things and say, oh, God did them to us. Or sometimes we might look at things and say, these are bad things, and God is present with us and giving solace to us in the midst of them. Often how we feel about that will depend on where we are in the grief cycle. If you are grieving and it's still raw and hurting, me telling you it's going to be all right probably isn't going to sound in your ears very positively. If you're grieving and saying, I know that God is with me in this, you probably aren't at the second chapter of Lamentations. You're probably at a different part of the Bible entirely. But right now, as you are grieving the changes that are wrought by COVID-19 and coronavirus, this anger might suit you. You might be angry at political leaders and either the ways that they or their opponents have handled this crisis. You might be angry at medical leaders for not being able to come up with an effective treatment plan. You might be angry at your loss of freedom, angry that you can't shop and buy the things you want to buy, that you can't go and travel places you want to travel, angry that you are not able to work in a job that you care about and love, angry that children and grandchildren, nieces and neighbors, nephews, and all aren't able to be in school. You might be angry. As the author in the second chapter of Lamentations was. The second chapter of Lamentations is 22 verses long. Again, like the first chapter, each one of these verses begins with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It then moves from saying we were attacked, it moves from that anger to his sorrows. Verse 12, for instance, has children crying to their mothers, "Where is the bread and wine?" as they faint like the wounded in the streets of the city. The author says, "What can I say for you? To what compare you, O daughter Jerusalem?" in verse 13. "To what can I liken you, that I may comfort you, O virgin daughter Zion? For vast as the sea is your ruin, who can heal you?" I know one of the things that we haven't had to do with Mary, because she's 2, is explain why there is tape in the playground. But I know that my sisters, I have a couple of 10-year-old nephews and a 7-year-old nephew, have had to work at trying to explain what is going on in this reality and in this time, and there is sorrow associated with that. The end of the second chapter calls on the Lord. It says this from verse 20 onward: "Look, O Lord, and consider, to whom have you done this?" I'm not going to read the end of that verse. I have trouble with it. It implores God to action. When I look at the coronavirus, I do not look at it as being sent by God. I look at it as a reflection of a world that is filled with a multitude of things, good and ill. When I look at the coronavirus, when I am sad and when I lament, where I see God is in people helping each other, loving each other, caring for each other. Where I see God is in people in the grocery store wearing a cloth mask, knowing that that mask does very little to improve their own safety, but wearing it so that it might make a stranger less likely to be infected. When I consider where is God, it is less in the Air Force jets flying overhead. It's more in people, doctors, nurses, technicians, janitors, administrative assistants, going into a hospital to take care of the sick. When I wonder, where do I see God? When I ask God, where are you? I see God in the people who are stocking grocery store shelves. I see God in the people who are deciding that they will not open their business until they can be sure that they will be keeping others safe. When I consider where do I see God, I see God working with all of those who are trying to find safe ways in our counties and in our states and in our countries to take care of each other, to feed the hungry, to care for the sick.